My name is Gary Price, and I was married to Gwen, who I thought would be my true love. We got married right after college, mainly because she was expecting a baby, and we were in love. I studied computer science and business, while Gwen studied art and loved to have fun with a minor in finance. I have a high IQ and a great memory, while Gwen was a bit carefree but had her own charms. Our first child was William, and a year later we welcomed Sarah. Gwen decided to stay at home while I worked as a systems analyst for the government. My bosses noticed that I was doing well at my job, so I received a promotion. However, I wasn't allowed to talk about my work. Even with Gwen, our relationship was enjoyable in many ways. Gwen was open to trying new things, but there were boundaries, she said, and I respected that. When the kids started school, Gwen expressed her desire to work to help with our finances. I agreed because no matter how hard I tried, she never seemed completely happy with what we had. Our mortgage took up most of my paycheck, but she wanted a bigger house in a nice area. Gwen began working as an assistant at an accounting firm, and while her salary was decent, I noticed the money started going mostly to her new car instead of our shared expenses. When I questioned her about why her paycheck was going into her personal account and not ours, she got very upset, arguing that she earned it and could decide what to do with it. In response, I closed our joint account and changed where my paycheck went. One evening, she tried to use her debit card for gas, but it didn't work. She had to pay out of her own pocket, which led to a big argument when she got home. For the rest of the week, we didn't speak much. Over the next few weeks, things calmed down, but I felt we were growing apart. One night when Gwen came home, I suggested that we talk. After the kids were in bed, we sat down facing each other. Gwen looked worried and a bit sad, so I started the conversation. Gwen, I know things have been tough between us, and we need to sort things out. You are spending more money than we can afford on things we don't really need, like your fancy car. This has to change. You mean you don't want a divorce? Is this only about money? I thought you were seeing someone else. She started crying and almost knocked me off my chair as she approached me. Gwen, I can't believe you said that. You know I love you so much. There could never be anyone else for me. But you have to stop spending like this. Okay, I understand that I got a bit out of hand. It's just that my friends have nicer things and I feel like I can't keep up. Friendship isn't about competing. If it is, maybe you need new friends. I like my friends, and I want to keep hanging out with them. I promise I'll spend less. Is that all right? If you keep that promise, we won't have to talk about this again. Then we will be fine. That night, she showed me affection in a way that took me by surprise. Over the next few months, she kept her word, handling her car expenses and even paying for some groceries on her debit card. At work, our department supervisor had a heart problem, and I had been filling in for him for the past 6 months. I was called into the director's office and told he wouldn't be back because of his health. They asked if I would take the job permanently, which was a big promotion and came with a good raise. I was thrilled and even received extra pay for the time I had already been doing the job. Our financial worries were eased, and I felt more relaxed. We needed to celebrate. After dinner, I shared the good news with Gwen, and we decided to plan a vacation later that year. We got approval from our HR departments and made our plans. After looking at many brochures, we settled on a 2-week trip to one of the Cayman Islands. The day before we left, we stayed at Gwen's parents' house to leave the kids there. The next morning, her dad drove us to the airport. The only problem was that I had a report to finish, and Gwen was not happy it would take much of the first 2 days of our trip. When we arrived at the hotel, we were shown to our room. It was small but cozy, with a bed and a nice shower. It didn't matter much since we planned to spend most of our time out exploring. We had dinner at the hotel restaurant and then took a leisurely walk near the beach like young lovers. That night we shared a warm moment and fell into a peaceful sleep. The next morning after breakfast, we went back to our room. I opened my laptop to start working while Gwen went down to the pool to relax, agreeing to meet for lunch later. I worked for about 2 hours before deciding to take a break. I opened a cold drink and stepped out onto the landing. As I looked down, I noticed the pool. There was my wife, lying on a sunbed, chatting with an older couple who had joined her. She opened her sunblock and the woman next to her said something to her husband, who nodded. He then helped to apply the sunblock on Gwen's back. I felt a twinge of jealousy, but reminded myself there was no need to feel that way since his wife was right there with them. Just then, Gwen reached around to adjust her top for better coverage. Feeling a rush of frustration, I quickly left our room for the pool area, but by the time I arrived, Gwen was on her own. "Hey, honey, taking a break from your work?" I called out. "Yeah." "Who were those people you were talking to?" she replied. "Oh, just an older couple on vacation. James and his wife Mary. They're staying in the hotel next door, and the two places share the pool." We spent about an hour chatting before going back to our room to change for lunch. After we ate, Gwen returned to the pool while I went back to my report. A little later, I paused for another break and looked down at the pool. I saw Gwen talking to the same couple. I decided to introduce myself. As I walked over, Gwen waved and I joined them. She introduced us, and Gwen mentioned that Mary had invited her to go shopping later that afternoon. Mary needed to drop off their morning purchases at their apartment and left James and me alone. James, who claimed to be French but spoke with no accent, and I chatted about various topics until our conversation turned to women. He shared that he thought women could shop all day and come home empty-handed, which I found amusing and agreed with. Then he expressed his belief that women were influenced by superficial things and not always reliable. I defended Gwen, saying she was trustworthy. He laughed and said he could win her over by the end of the week if he wanted. I told him he was welcome to try, but that I fully trusted my wife. He chuckled and called me naive, suggesting many women were swayed by material things. In contrast, he said women from other backgrounds were often treated differently. I was about to respond when he glanced at his watch, said he needed to leave, and we shook hands before he walked away. I felt uneasy about Gwen spending time with someone who thought that way and decided I would talk to her about it. When I returned to our room, I discovered Gwen had already gone out. I went back to my work and finished my report 2 hours later. I called Gwen on her phone, but it went straight to voicemail, so I sent her a message. "I finished my report early. Where are you? I would like to join you and we can go somewhere nice for dinner." 2 hours later, she replied, "Sorry, I forgot to turn on my phone. I had a fun time shopping. Wait until you see what James bought for me. I'll see you soon." I waited in the room for her until 7:30 and was about to call her again when she came in, carrying several shopping bags with fancy labels. "Where have you been? I've been waiting for over 2 hours. It's getting late for dinner." "Oh, I stopped at a restaurant on the way back, so I've already eaten." "Great. Now I'm here by myself." "I'm sorry, I just got caught up in shopping. Why don't you grab something to eat and I'll show you what I bought when you get back?" I felt too tired to eat now. "Just show me what you bought." She took the bags into the bathroom and came out a few minutes later. I was shocked. She was wearing a very revealing outfit that showed a lot of skin. "That's the most revealing outfit I've ever seen." "Why did you buy that?" She pouted. "I like it, and James said it looked good on me." I couldn't believe it. "When did James see you in that?" "Don't be upset. Mary was there too. They helped me pick it out. Look at this." She went back into the bathroom and came out in a very short dress that had a high cut. She wore bright heels and a see-through wrap. I was not impressed. "I didn't just buy things for myself. I got you a little gift too." She handed me an envelope with a ticket inside for deep-sea fishing the next day. "I know you enjoy fishing. I thought you'd like a day out after working so hard." I looked at the ticket. I had to be at the boat by 7:30 a.m. and wouldn't be back until 4:30 p.m., and lunch was included. I thanked her for the gift, but then she said something that bothered me again. "James and Mary invited us to a nightclub with them tonight, so you should get ready." "No." "What?" I said no. "I don't want to go out with your new friends tonight or any night. I want to spend some quality time with you." "But I already said we would go." I tossed the phone to her. "Well, you can tell them I've canceled. Now put on something that isn't so revealing and we can go dance in the ballroom downstairs." As she started to dial, I added, ****, and don't ask them to join us, ****. We changed our clothes and went downstairs. We got a table and some drinks. I could tell she was upset, but as the evening went on, she started to relax a little and seemed to have fun. That night, I was surprised by how much energy she brought. I had set my phone alarm for 6 so I could have some breakfast before I left. I was enjoying my time fishing and caught a few fish, but none were big enough to keep. When we took a break for lunch, I called Gwen. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Hi, babe. How's the fishing?" I caught a few, but nothing special. We just stopped for lunch. Where are you? James and Mary are taking me shopping in a little town up the coast. We're on the boat now. Mary and I are relaxing while James steers. You don't mind, do you? Well, I do. You're spending too much time with them. We need to spend time together. Look, they're my friends, and I want to be with them. It's my choice. We're supposed to be on holiday together to reconnect. Have you forgotten? I don't want to argue now and ruin my day. I'll see you tonight. I got back from fishing around 5 p.m., but the room was empty. I called Gwen, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent her a text and waited. By 8 p.m., I received a text with a photo attached. It was a picture of my wife in a nice dress outside a nightclub. The message said, "I'm going out with James and Mary. You're not invited because you said you wouldn't come. Don't wait up. I might not be back tonight." I went down to the reception and showed them the picture, asking where the nightclub was. They gave me directions, and I called a cab. When I got to the club, I saw a long line of people waiting to enter. I tried to get in, but the bouncers stopped me and pushed me back into some bushes. As I brushed myself off, I glanced up and thought I saw my wife looking down at me, but I couldn't be sure. I tried calling and texting her all night, finally falling into a restless sleep dot the next morning. I woke up and immediately tried to call Gwen, but it went to voicemail again. I asked her to call me back because I was worried. Then I texted her, leaving a message to please contact me. After changing and showering, I went for breakfast, but I waited in our room for her to reply. On a whim, I looked in her wardrobe and noticed some empty hangers. I opened a few drawers, which were nearly empty. Then I looked for our luggage and saw that her bag was missing. A sudden feeling of worry washed over me as I rushed to the bathroom. Why had she packed her things? Was she planning to leave? Just before I went out for lunch, I received a text from Gwen. "Sorry you couldn't get into the club last night, but James told the doorman not to let you in. You would have spoiled my evening anyway. I'm sending you this text from James's boat. We're going island hopping for a few weeks. Please don't try to follow me. It's something I have to do. I'll be back in a few weeks and we can go on as if nothing happened. Love you, Gwen." I was about to respond when another message came in from James, and it had an attachment. "I told you I could take her away from you. Now maybe you'll believe me. It only took a little money for her to forget who she was. It happened much faster than I expected. Just buying her a $200 swimsuit made a difference. That afternoon, I got her a nice dress and some accessories for under $3,000, and she was very friendly with me. Yesterday, we visited a jewelry store, and I got her a matching necklace and bracelet for $9,000. When you saw her at the club, I was there too. She is completely in my control now. I'll send her back once I'm done, a little worn out, but still useful. Without the jewelry, of course." Feeling sick, I opened the attachment. There was a video of my wife with James. It showed Gwen doing something with her phone while James was there. After a moment, Gwen turned to the camera, smiling, and the video showed more than I ever wanted to see. I couldn't believe it. I replied to Gwen's earlier message with just 3 words. "No, we won't." I turned my phone off. I couldn't take any more. I lay on the bed and cried myself to sleep, knowing my marriage was over. I woke up at 7 p.m. and went down to the restaurant for dinner, but I couldn't eat. I thought about drinking to forget, but that wasn't me, so I went back to my room. The next morning, I realized it wasn't a dream. My life had turned upside down, and there was nothing I could do. I called the airport to change my flight to this afternoon and started packing. I put all of Gwen's clothes into 2 trash bags and threw them in the dumpster behind the hotel. I checked out and went to the airport. On the flight, I called Gwen's parents, Ted and Amy, to ask them to pick me up at the airport. When Ted asked why we were coming back early, I said I'd explain later. After we landed, I went through customs, grabbed my luggage, and walked into the arrival area, where I saw Ted waiting for me. He looked at me, then searched behind me for Gwen. When he asked where she was, I told him she wouldn't be coming. "What do you mean she's not coming, Aunt? Is she okay?" he asked. "Let's get to the car. It's a long story," I replied. Once we were in the car, Ted asked again what was going on. "Where is Gwen?" As we drove, I quickly explained that Gwen had left me for another man. He didn't believe me, so I promised to show him the proof when we got home. When we arrived, the children were already asleep. We sat at the dinner table and I shared everything that had happened. Even after hearing the whole story, they were still unsure. So I showed them the texts and video. After seeing the evidence, Ami ran out of the room in tears and Ted just sat there looking very sad. Then he stood up, placed his hand on my shoulder and apologized for our daughter's choices. Ted and Amy offered to take care of the children for the next few weeks while I figured things out. The next day, I went to see a lawyer and told him about my situation. He asked if there was any chance we could get back together. When I said no, he explained my options. I could file for divorce based on infidelity since I had enough proof. However, it would likely mean a 50-50th split, with me paying support for her and the kids. She would probably get to keep the house until the children turned 18. I told him to prepare the papers anyway. There was no way I wanted to stay married. Next, comma. I made an appointment to see the director at work. When I got there, I was taken straight in. We shook hands and he asked what was going on. I explained everything and even showed him the video. He was shocked. He told me that anyone in the NSA who had a big life event needed to talk to a company counselor. An appointment was set for me to see Amanda Gray, our psychologist. I had met her briefly when I joined the NSA. She was a few years younger than me, about 5'6", with a pleasant appearance and a sharp mind. When I returned home, the house felt empty. It didn't seem like a home anymore, just a place to sleep. I wondered when I would see Gwen again. Against my better judgment, I tried calling her, but the number didn't work anymore. I called her parents to check on the kids, and they said the children were doing well. They mentioned they had also tried to reach Gwen, but couldn't. I went to the police station to report her missing and showed them the video. They informed me that it was clear from the evidence and her messages that she had left willingly, so there was nothing they could do. I felt stuck. I had already taken steps to protect my finances and talked to a lawyer. All I could do was wait for her to return. I attended the counseling session and had to share my whole story again. By the end, I felt overwhelmed with emotion. Amanda was very understanding but remained professional. She explained that she would ask me to recount my experiences periodically, hoping that over time the pain would lessen with each session. She asked if I understood why Gwen had acted the way she did. I thought maybe it was because she was overwhelmed by James's money and charm. She seemed to agree and asked if there were any other problems we should talk about. I mentioned that I had been having nightmares about the two bouncers who had treated me poorly. She said this feeling of helplessness was normal given what I had experienced. At the end of our session, she recommended that I should not return to work until I dealt with some of my issues. I would also need to continue my counseling for a while because I was facing symptoms of stress from my experiences. After the session, I had to meet with the director after lunch. I sat alone in the canteen, and my co-workers, who normally sat with me, avoided looking my way and stayed distant. When I got to the director's office, I was let in right away. He was very understanding and shared some advice based on what Amanda had told him. He informed me that I was suspended from my duties until further notice and would need to attend 3 counseling sessions each week. To help with my feelings of helplessness after the incident, he suggested I could take a self-defense class with the Marines at Quantico after each session. This was optional, but I was eager to improve my physical and mental state. The classes would start next Monday and continue on Wednesday and Friday until I was ready to return to work. I was nervous about the first appointment and reliving that difficult week. When I arrived, I was shown right in, and Amanda and I shook hands to start the session. By the end of it, I felt emotionally drained, but Amanda assured me that this was normal at the beginning. For lunch, I went to a nearby deli to avoid the pitying looks from my co-workers in the canteen. After lunch, I made my way to Quantico for my first workout. My instructor was a Marine named Mike Sanders. He looked me over and bluntly told me I had a lot of work ahead. Then he laid out my fitness plan, which included weights, running, swimming, and daily exercises like 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, and a 2-mile run on days when I wasn't at Quantico. By the end of the day, I was exhausted and had hardly finished my workout. That night I slept deeply and was thankful not to have any nightmares for the first time. In the morning I felt really sore all over and walking was painful, but I put on some comfortable clothes and attempted my 2-mile run. I reached the park and had to sit for about 10 minutes to catch my breath. But at least my aches had gotten a bit better, that is, until I stood up again and realized I couldn't run anymore that day. So I went home and took a long, hot bath. I was determined to get fit and make Mike proud, so I decided to join a gym. The next day was a gym day, and I limped into Amanda's office. When she asked what happened to my leg, I told her. She tried to hold back her laughter, but eventually we both ended up chuckling. She said my sense of humor was a good sign for my recovery, and we continued with our session. After 2 months of counseling, I could talk about that tough week without getting upset, and Amanda seemed impressed. I started to look forward to my sessions, including the one at Quantico, and even the homework. The 2-hour gym sessions twice a week really paid off. I no longer had a dad belly. Instead, I gained a lot of muscle and was feeling good. I even updated my look, buying new clothes and changing my haircut to a neater style, kind of like a military cut, but not as short. After 3 months, Amanda said I could go back to work, but I still needed to see her once a week. I was a bit sad about this because I liked her and wanted to spend more time together. I asked her out to lunch, but she said it wouldn't be right to have a relationship with a patient. However, she encouraged me to ask again after our sessions were over. I felt excited and hoped to be fully better soon. I still hadn't heard from Gwen and figured I probably wouldn't. She seemed to be enjoying life without me, but I found myself not caring as much. I talked to my lawyer, who said it wouldn't help much to try and divorce her since I couldn't reach her. He suggested waiting until she'd been gone for a year and then filing for desertion. That's what I decided to do. After 4 months, Amanda told me I didn't need counseling anymore and asked me out to lunch. I was thrilled. Since I went back to work, I realized it wouldn't work for the kids to stay with their grandparents anymore. So I arranged for a part-time nanny named Maria to help take the kids to school, pick them up, and make dinner. By the time I got home, I could help them with their homework and spend some time together. I took them out on Saturdays and to Gwen's parents for Sunday dinners. I soon noticed that the kids were struggling with their mom being away, and their schoolwork started to slip. I decided to talk to the principal, who suggested child counseling after I explained everything. After dating Amanda for a while, we had mostly kept things simple, just a few dates and goodnight kisses. I didn't want to rush anything as I was starting to really like her, but wasn't sure if she felt the same. Then one evening, she invited me to her apartment for a drink. It was a Friday night, and I had time since my kids were staying with family. It was the first time I had been to her place, and I was impressed by how neat and cozy it felt. As we sat down with the hot chocolate she made, Amanda spoke up. "Gary, we've been seeing each other for over a month now, and you haven't made any moves. Is it because you're still hurting from your wife leaving? Or do you not find me attractive?" I took a deep breath before replying. "It's true that it hurt when she left me and the kids, but I'm not thinking about her anymore. As for you, Amanda, you're beautiful. I just didn't want you to feel like a rebound. So when are you going to take the next step? Or do I need to ask for it?" Without saying much, I moved closer to her, and we shared a long, passionate kiss. It felt like everything else faded away. We stayed like that for a while, just enjoying each other's company. We were connected in a way that felt natural, and we let the moment guide us. Later, the night ended with both of us feeling closer than we had before. It was a moment of shared understanding, care, and affection, something neither of us had experienced for a while. It wasn't about rushing things or needing something to happen. It was just about being together in the moment, respecting each other's pace and allowing our feelings to deepen naturally. We knew this was just the beginning of something meaningful. There's something special about the connection you share during an intimate moment. As we enjoyed ourselves, she started to feel the excitement building. Once we both caught our breath, we joined each other in the shower and shared some loving times before heading to bed, where we quickly fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to the wonderful smell of breakfast cooking. After I got ready, I walked into the kitchen to find Amanda making pancakes and bacon, one of my favorite meals. She looked a little shy and joked, "Breakfast is ready." We both laughed and sat down, chatting about everything except what happened the night before. Amanda mentioned that if I was staying again that night, we needed to go grocery shopping. I explained that I had plans to eat at my in-laws on Sunday, so I needed to head home early that morning. That afternoon, we went shopping to fill her kitchen. Afterward, instead of cooking, we treated ourselves to lunch at a nice fish restaurant where we enjoyed lobster and salad. I then asked her if she'd like to go dancing that evening, and she happily agreed. We had a great time, holding each other as we moved around the dance floor. When we returned to her apartment, we ended up in bed again, but this time we took our time and enjoyed each other's company more softly. I realized I was starting to fall for her, and I told her so. She said she felt the same way, but suggested we take it slow. I left early the next morning since I needed to change before visiting my in-laws. When I arrived at my in-laws' home, I decided to tell them about my new relationship. I hugged the kids, Amy, and even shared a friendly hug with Ted. When they asked why I was so cheerful, I told them about Amanda and expected them to be disappointed. Instead, they all hugged me again with genuine happiness. They were glad I had found someone new since it had been a while since I'd heard from Gwen. They invited me to bring Amanda over for dinner next Sunday, and I agreed to ask her later, after putting the kids to bed. I called Amanda to share how my in-laws reacted and that she was invited to dinner. She was excited but wanted to meet the children first. I suggested she come over for the weekend, and I would drop her off at work on Monday. We set a plan to meet for lunch that coming Monday. When I arrived at work on Monday, my secretary told me to go directly to the director's office. I was greeted by his secretary and led into the office where I met George Price. There was another man there who was introduced as Special Agent Larry Smith. I asked if I was in any trouble, and George told me I wasn't. However, Agent Smith had some questions for me about Gwen's disappearance. He said he had seen a video and believed she had left on her own and that I was not a suspect. But he mentioned that there had been no activity in her bank account for the last 4 months. He noted that my situation wasn't unique. Several other American women had left their husbands similarly and were never heard from again. The Bureau was looking into it, but since it wasn't their area, they couldn't do much, and the local police were not interested in family matters. He wanted to know if I had any more information to add. I told him that I had shared everything I knew. He said he would talk to her parents later to see if they could provide more details. When he left, George asked if I needed anything and how things were at home. I realized he was asking for something he already knew, so I shared about Amanda and me. He seemed relieved that I had been open without him having to push me. When I got back to my office, I called Amanda to fill her in, but she already knew. She had had a similar talk with her boss earlier that Friday. I picked up a nervous Amanda and drove her to my house to meet the kids. As soon as we got out of the car, William and Sarah came running out the door and hugged me tightly. Sarah was the first to speak. "Are you going to be our new mommy?" Amanda looked at me and smiled as if to say, "Well, tell her." "I don't know yet, sweetie, but I really hope she wants the job." I smiled back at Amanda and she blushed a bit as she picked Sarah up. "How about you two show me your rooms?" They walked inside and Maria greeted us with a smile and gave me a thumbs up. "Mr. Price, since you mentioned bringing a guest home, I made something special for dinner. Roast chicken with all the sides. It will be ready in 15 minutes. I told my husband I'd be home later so I could serve dinner and clean up." "Maria, thank you for doing all this. I really appreciate it and insist that you join us for dinner." By the time I finished setting the table, Amanda and the kids returned, excitedly talking about their rooms and how tidy they were. I glanced at Maria, who avoided my gaze. I suspected she had rearranged their rooms. The 5 of us sat down and enjoyed our meal. Afterward, Amanda helped clean up, earning an approving smile from Maria. Once Maria left for the night, I always arranged a cab for her. Amanda played with the kids until bedtime. To my delight, they insisted she read them their bedtime story and tuck them in. That was always my responsibility, something even Gwen had never been involved in. Things were going better than I had expected. When Amanda came downstairs, I was making coffee and handed her a cup. "Well, that went smoother than I hoped," I said. "Your children are just lovely. They're so well adjusted, especially considering everything they've been through." "I'm really impressed," she replied. "I took some advice from you and got them to see a counselor. It seems to be making a difference." "Well, good for you. It's really paying off," she said, giving me a kiss on the cheek and a warm hug. We sat quietly for a few moments, both thinking. Then Amanda broke the silence. "Gary, did you mean what you said earlier about wanting me to be their mom?" "Yes, but only if you want to. The pay isn't great, but there are some perks," I said with a smile. "What do you think? Is this your way of proposing?" Yes, I guess it is. Am I moving too fast? Yes and no. No, you're not going too fast, and yes, I accept. She jumped into my arms, and we shared a heartfelt kiss. That night, there was no need for any grand gestures. We were focused on the kids, and I wasn't ready to rush anything yet. On Saturday, I told the children that Amanda had agreed to be their new mom, though she wouldn't be moving in right away. They seemed to understand. We all headed to the mall and treated ourselves to milkshakes. The kids asked Amanda lots of questions, which she answered with patience. Later, we spent the morning looking for an engagement ring and finally chose a diamond solitaire. Sarah was over the moon about the whole experience, but William didn't seem to understand what all the excitement was about. Since the kids had been so well behaved, we let them choose where to eat, and we ended up at Pizza Hut. We spent the rest of the day buying things for the kids, new sneakers and soccer boots for William, and trainers and a leotard for Sarah. Of course, we also picked up groceries for dinner, but the kids weren't nearly as interested in that dot. That evening, Amanda made lasagna with garlic bread, and it was a hit. The kids and I cleared the table, and we sat Amanda down with a glass of wine, as a small thank you for cooking. After she read the kids a bedtime story, she joined me on the couch, and we enjoyed another glass of wine while cuddling. I noticed Amanda glancing around the room, her eyes landing on a wedding photo of Gwen and me. I explained that I kept the photos up because I didn't want to erase Gwen from the kids' lives. Amanda thought it was a great idea, acknowledging that their mother might return someday. That night, we said goodnight and headed to our separate rooms. Sunday morning, I found Amanda in the kitchen making breakfast while the kids watched TV. I came up behind her and gave her a gentle hug, kissing the back of her neck. She smiled and leaned into me. If the kids weren't here, you'd be in trouble for that, she teased with a grin. I noticed that she seemed a little uneasy, so I asked her why. We're going to see your in-laws after breakfast, and it will be the first time they meet their new daughter-in-law, she replied. I honestly hadn't thought of it that way. Now I'm nervous too, but I believe it will be okay, I said. After breakfast, we all got into my car and drove to my grandparents' house. When we arrived, Ted and Amy came out to greet us. I introduced Amanda to them, and we all went inside. Amy took Amanda's hand and asked, "When did this happen?" I could feel my cheeks heat up as I replied, "It happened yesterday. Is that a problem?" Amy looked at Ted and said, "As long as she treats you better than Gwen did, everything will be fine. But if she hurts you, she'll have to answer to us." Amanda quickly went to Amy and hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "You don't have to worry about me. I could never hurt Gary. I love him too much. Thank you for being so kind to me. I wasn't sure how this meeting would go." Ted came over and wrapped his arms around Amanda. "Welcome to the family. We think of Gary as our son, and now we have a daughter too." The day ended with Amanda and me putting the sleepy children in their car seats and waving goodbye to their happy grandparents. That night, we slept in separate beds for the children's comfort. In the morning, we woke up early for work. While we got ready, Maria made breakfast. We said goodbye to the kids and headed out. I dropped Amanda off at her apartment to get her car before going to work. We met for lunch every day and sometimes went back to her place for a quick visit. Ted and Amy took care of the children on Friday nights so we could go out dancing and later return to her apartment. On Saturdays, we picked up the kids for a day out, and Sundays were spent with the in-laws. A year after Gwen left, I got a divorce and was granted full custody of the children. Amanda and I set a date for our wedding the next spring. Amanda and Amy started planning everything, and Ted advised me not to get involved, letting them handle the arrangements. My parents had died when I was young, and my aunt raised me. She passed away shortly after my marriage to Gwen, so I didn't have family to invite. Just a few friends. Amanda hadn't heard from her older sister in 10 years, so it was unlikely she would come either. We invited many of the people who attended my wedding to Gwen, as both Amy and Ted insisted we were now family. I could see that Ted was close to tears when Amanda asked him to walk her down the aisle, and Amy teared up when she was asked to be her matron of honor. I chose William to be my best man, and Ted explained what he needed to do. Sarah was chosen as a bridesmaid and helped pick out her dress. It was almost 2 years since Ted walked Amanda down the aisle and gave her to me. There were hardly any dry eyes in the church. The reception was fancy but small, with only 25 guests. For our honeymoon, we traveled to the Bahamas for 2 weeks of sun, sand, and relaxation. When we returned home, both of us felt refreshed and ready for married life. Gwen was just a distant memory. 6 months later, Amanda said something that made my heart sink. "Honey, we need to talk." I sat down with her, feeling heavy inside and trying to hold back tears. "What do you want to talk about? I thought we were happy." I could see concern on Amanda's face. She quickly came into my arms. "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry if you misunderstood. There's nothing wrong and we are very happy. I love you more than I can say. We need to talk because I'm pregnant and it's twins. We need a bigger house." I almost fainted with relief and pulled her close for a warm kiss. I was filled with joy. We started looking for a new home right away since we had only 7 months to find the perfect place. With our combined income and part of the money from our old house, I saved the rest for Ted in case Gwen returned, we had enough to buy a nice 5-bedroom house with a guest suite and a pool nearby. The house needed some work because it had belonged to someone involved in crime, and it was stripped by the authorities. We moved in 2 weeks before Amanda gave birth to our twins, Jason and Wendy. We named them after Gwen's parents, which made them very happy. Amanda decided she wanted to stay home with the kids until they started school. We kept Maria on to help with chores. For the next 3 years, life was as good as it could be, or so I thought. One morning at work, I was called to the director's office. When I arrived, I was greeted by a man in a formal suit who was introduced as Special Agent Frank Grimes. We shook hands and I took a seat. While we settled in, George poured us some coffee. "Gary, may I call you Gary?" Frank asked. "Sure, but only if I can call you Frank." "Now that's settled, I have to let you know this conversation is being recorded. Is that okay?" "As long as I get a copy, I don't mind." "Of course. First, let me assure you, you are not in any trouble. The recording is just for reference. Could you please tell me everything that happened up to the point when your wife sent that last text?" "Oh no, not again." I told the whole story once more, hoping it would be the last time. When I finished, Frank slid a photo toward me and asked if it was Gwen. I looked at the picture, and even though she looked older and more tired, it was definitely her. I nodded. "Yes, that's her, a bit older, but it's definitely her. Why?" "She's in a safe place after being rescued 3 days ago, and she wants to see you. While she doesn't have a right to see you, she can see her children. We think it would be best for you to see her first. I know you're hesitant, but she has an important reason for not contacting you in the last 5 years." Gwen's story, told by Gwen. I was really looking forward to our trip to the Cayman Islands, so I packed and unpacked my bags many times until I felt ready. Then the day before we left, Gary had to dampen my mood by saying he needed to finish a report and it would take up our first 2 days there. I was very frustrated. That night, when he reached for me, I turned away and moved to the edge of the bed, deciding to hold off on being close for a while. When we arrived at the hotel, we unpacked and went for a walk along the beach. We went dancing that evening, and I felt guilty about my earlier decision. Back in our room, we quickly showered and went to bed, where I made up for the night before the next morning. We had breakfast, and Gary started working on his report while I went to relax by the pool. After about an hour, 2 people came to sit next to me. They were a married couple, and he had retired comfortably and visited the island every year. His name was James, and her name was Mary. My back started to feel a bit sunburned, so I took out my sunscreen. Mary jokingly told James to help me with it. I didn't think much of it since she was right there, so I handed him the bottle. While we talked, James helped apply the lotion to my back and asked if I would mind loosening my swim top a bit. Without thinking much, I did so and kept chatting with Mary. As James continued, I noticed his fingers brushed against my sides. I felt a little thrill, but didn't say anything. Once he finished, he got up. Mary mentioned she needed to go back to their apartment for her hat and asked if I wanted to join her for some shopping afterward. I agreed, and we planned to meet in front of the hotel in about 45 minutes. Just then, Gary returned, taking a break from his work. I introduced him to James before heading up to change. I met Mary as planned, and she called a cab to take us shopping. She suggested we grab a coffee first, so we went to a nice restaurant where we ordered coffee and cake. We were talking about our shopping trip when James came over, pulled out a chair, and sat down. I was a bit surprised because I didn't expect him to join us. He ordered a coffee and we sat and chatted. After finishing our drinks, we went shopping. Mary seemed to know exactly where to go, so I just followed her dot. We entered a fancy boutique, and Mary and I split up to look at clothes. I wasn't sure why I bothered since I couldn't spend much. Soon, Mary came over with James and held up a very small bikini. "You have to try this on. You'll look great," she said. I didn't want to seem shy, so I took it to the changing room and tried it on. It felt like I was hardly wearing anything at all, but it did look nice. "Come on, Gwen, let's see how you look," Mary called. I stepped outside to show them, feeling a bit shy since James was there. I stood nervously in front of both of them and did a little turn. James then said, "You look amazing. You really should get it as a gift from us." I decided not to argue and gave him a quick hug and a peck on the cheek. Then I went back to change. While I looked in the mirror, the door opened, and James walked in. I was surprised that Mary let him come in, but I wasn't too worried. He complimented me again on how I looked, and to my shock, he unfastened the clasp at the back. I quickly held the top in place and turned to look at him in the mirror. He smiled and then left the room. I was left feeling confused, but noticed a little flutter inside me. I hurried to change and walked out. Mary and James were waiting, and both were smiling as if they shared a secret. As I walked past them, Mary said, "Don't worry about it. They're just having a bit of fun." After that, we had lunch and continued shopping. I realized I hadn't thought about Gary at all while I was with them. Over the next couple of hours, they insisted on buying me a striking cocktail dress and accessories. We stopped at a nice restaurant for dinner, and Mary invited Gary and me to go clubbing that night. I happily accepted and looked forward to the evening. Mary suggested we return to their apartment so I could show them all my new clothes. On the way back, Mary said we should buy Gary something too. I suggested a day of fishing, and James happily bought him a ticket for tomorrow. When we got back to their apartment, I went into one of the bedrooms to change. While I was in there, I added up how much they had spent on me and realized it was almost $4,000. I returned to the living room and showed off my new outfit. They both came over and made a few small adjustments until they were happy with how I looked. Mary said, "You look amazing. Wait until Gary sees you in that." I went back into the bedroom to change again. As I was taking off my new dress, James walked in and stood there looking at me. I didn't feel too concerned since Mary was outside, and he had already seen me in my bikini, which showed more than my underwear. He put his hands on my shoulders and turned me to face him. "Do you like the things we bought for you today?" "Oh yes, they're wonderful. I don't know how to thank you." "I can think of a way, and if you thank me properly, there will be more tomorrow." He placed his hands on my shoulders and pushed me down. I was surprised, but felt he expected something in return for his generosity. I allowed him to guide me down, and I looked up at him. I was unsure about what he wanted, but I felt a lot of pressure and confusion. After a while, he finished and cleaned himself up before leaving the room. I tidied myself as best I could and followed him out. Mary was there, and I couldn't meet her eyes. She lifted my chin and reassured me that it was just his way and that she didn't mind. I felt ashamed as I returned to our hotel room. What did this mean? Was I being unfaithful? When I entered the room, Gary was waiting and asked why I was so late. He said we would miss dinner. I had forgotten that Gary was waiting for food, and guilt washed over me. I showed him my new outfit, but he didn't seem impressed. I even handed him his fishing ticket, but his mood didn't change. He became even more frustrated when I mentioned we were supposed to go clubbing with James and Mary later. He outright refused and made me call Mary to cancel Dot. We ended up going out dancing and had a great time. When we came back to our room, I tried to be close with him to ease my guilt. In the morning, Gary had already left for fishing, and I didn't expect to see him until later. Mary called and asked if I wanted to go on a trip up the coast to a different resort. I agreed, and she suggested I bring my new bikini and outfit with me. We planned to meet outside the hotel in an hour. We headed to James's boat and set off. I was excited about what they might buy me today and what I might have to do to earn it. I knew I had become dependent on their gifts, and I realized that at some point, James would expect more from me, and I likely wouldn't say no. As we left the marina, Mary suggested we change into our swimsuits and enjoy some sun. Mary took off her top and encouraged me to do the same, so I hesitantly followed her lead. It felt a bit daring to be in just my swimsuit in front of James and Mary. A little later, Gary called me on my phone and asked what we were up to. I explained we were heading to another part of the island, and he got upset, saying he wanted me to stop spending time with James and Mary. I told him I would do what I wanted and that I'd see him later before ending the call. When we arrived at our destination, we went out for lunch and then shopping. This time, they took me to a fancy jewelry store where Mary chose a necklace and bracelet for me that cost $9,000. I knew Gary would be upset about the price, but I thought, what he doesn't know won't hurt him. After shopping, we headed to their apartment for lunch. After we ate, Mary said she needed to run some errands, leaving me alone with James. We chatted for a bit, and then he stood up and walked behind me. I felt him gently slide the straps of my swimsuit off my shoulders, and his hands brushed against me. I couldn't help but react a little. He helped me up and led me to the bedroom. I knew I had crossed a line and realized I would have a hard time facing Gary later. Mary insisted we go to a club that night. When I mentioned that Gary wouldn't come, she said he wasn't invited anyway. I was surprised by her boldness, but agreed. I changed into my new outfit and jewelry, and we headed to the club. Before entering, I noticed several missed calls and texts from Gary. I felt frustrated with him for trying to control my life. I stood outside the club, took a selfie with the vibrant lights behind me, and added a message. Going out with James and Mary. You're not invited, as you said you wouldn't come. Don't wait for me. I might not be back tonight. I felt a sense of triumph. We entered the club, skipping the line since James was a regular, and Mary explained they had a special arrangement with the owner. We were taken up to the roof, where a table was set for 3. Mary mentioned we would have dinner first before joining the others at the party. We sat down and the meal was served. Lobster, salad, and a special dessert, all paired with white wine. After dinner, I began to feel a bit off, and when I mentioned it to Mary, she suggested it was probably the wine. I walked over to the edge of the roof, which overlooked the entrance to the club. Still feeling unsteady, I leaned on the wall and looked down at the people waiting in line. As I stood there, things started to blur, and I felt strangely detached from myself, like I was watching from a distance. As I tried to focus, I noticed Gary down below, trying to get into the club, causing a bit of a scene. Meanwhile, something strange was happening around me. I felt hands guiding me, but I was too disoriented to react properly. In my hazy state, everything became confusing and overwhelming. As I struggled to make sense of things, shame and regret began to creep in, and I felt tears starting to form. Eventually, someone led me away from the edge and back to the table, where I was given a drink, which I quickly swallowed. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a small cabin on a boat and we were moving. I got up and made my way to the deck, where the sun felt harsh against my head. We were out at sea. I asked where we were going, and they told me we'd be sailing from island to island for about a week. I immediately said I needed to return to the hotel to talk to Gary, but Mary suggested I text him, saying we had already agreed that I would be away for a while. I didn't recall any such agreement. Mary then showed me a video from the previous night and made it clear that if I didn't agree to join them, she would send it to Gary. Feeling trapped, I gave in and sent the text she had written. It was a moment of helplessness, and I had no choice but to comply, feeling conflicted and weighed down by the situation. After I finished texting Gary, I went below deck to my cabin, feeling overwhelmed and unsure about how to fix things when I got home. As I entered, I noticed my suitcase sitting by the bed. It turned out that while I was occupied, Mary had gone to our hotel room, taken my door card, packed my things, and brought them on board without me realizing it. For the next 2 weeks, we traveled from island to island, but it was nothing like I had imagined. At every stop, I was locked in my cabin while they went ashore, only being let out when the boat left each port. During this time, I was treated more like someone to be controlled rather than a guest or friend. I felt trapped, and my sense of isolation grew with each passing day. One morning, I was called to the deck and saw a plane approaching. It was a seaplane, and it landed a few hundred yards away. James took a small boat out to meet it, returning with a man he introduced as Raphael, though he told me to call him Raph. I felt uneasy, as Raph's gaze made me nervous. He and James spoke for a while, clearly making some sort of deal. I could tell from their conversation that something unsettling was happening. Raph made me uncomfortable from the moment he arrived, But when Mary casually told him he could take me to their bedroom, I was too shocked to respond. Raph led me away, and when I refused to comply with his demands, he struck me, knocking me to the ground. It was clear I had no choice but to do as he said, and fear gripped me as he made it clear that my fate was now in his hands. He told me that he had paid James a large sum of money for me, and from that moment on, I was expected to do whatever he wanted. He warned me that my life depended on pleasing him, and the threat was real. Feeling completely helpless, I did as I was told, all the while wishing I had listened to Gary, and realizing I might never see him or my children again. Once he was done, Raph spoke to James, satisfied with whatever arrangement they had made. The entire ordeal left me feeling more trapped than ever, unsure of what would come next. As I was getting ready to leave, Mary stopped me to inform me that all my belongings were packed, except for the jewelry, which they planned to use for their next target. We took off in the skiff and headed away from their boat. During the journey, we stopped twice for fuel and changed pilots twice, but I had no idea where we were going. I slept a lot, suspecting that something had been added to my drinks. Eventually, we landed at a private airstrip where two identical SUVs were waiting. One vehicle was used for the luggage, while Raph and I got into the other. We drove for about an hour before reaching a small marina where we boarded a large yacht. After a 2-hour sail, we approached a small island, docked at a pier guarded by armed men, and were driven in 2 jeeps along a narrow road through the jungle. Soon, a large building came into view, which I first thought was a villa. However, it became clear that it was more like a private compound, complete with a helicopter pad and numerous guards patrolling the area. We pulled up in front of the main building, and Raph instructed a servant to take our bags to our rooms. We entered the building and walked through a short hallway that led into a spacious atrium lined with curtained areas. I could glimpse large beds behind some of the curtains. A tall, elegant woman approached and greeted Raph with a kiss on the cheek. "So, is this the new girl?" she asked. "Yes, her name is Gwen, and she's quite capable. Show her to her room and explain the rules." The woman told me to follow her, and we climbed a winding staircase to a landing that overlooked the atrium. We walked along a short corridor to a room marked Celeste. "This is your room," she said, "and from now on your name is Celeste. I suggest you forget your past and accept your new life here. It will make things easier." I entered the room, noticing there was no lock on the door. It looked like a luxury hotel room, complete with a private shower and bathroom, a balcony with a sea view, and a large bed that seemed to fit several people. There was also a walk-in closet and a hot tub. "My name is Rhonda," she said, "but you will call me Madam or Mistress. You are not to speak to any man unless he addresses you first, and you will always call them Sir. The only men you may speak to freely are the servants who wear white uniforms. Your handlers, all women, will have name tags, and you are to address them as Ma'am. Do you understand?" "Yes, madam," I replied. "Good. You're catching on quickly. Now remember, you are no longer Mrs. Price. You gave up that life when you got involved with James. You turned your back on your family for a mere $4,000. From now on, you're just another woman who has been bought." With that, she left, leaving me alone in the room, overwhelmed by the realization of what my life had become. You didn't appreciate what you had, and now you've lost it all for a small amount of money and a foolish decision. Your husband and children are better off without you, so it's best to forget about them. They will likely be raised in a better environment by someone who values them more than you did. Your responsibilities here are simple. You will do as instructed and ensure that all guests are content. If anyone has a complaint about you, there will be consequences. These could range from mild discipline to more serious punishments, depending on the situation. The most extreme punishment for disobedience or attempting to escape is being thrown off the cliff near your room. If you follow the rules, things won't have to be difficult for you. You are here to entertain the guests and meet their needs, even if some of them have specific or uncomfortable requests. It's important that you understand this is your role now. Over the next month, I was trained in how to handle various situations with guests, learning to meet their expectations in every way. My first event was scheduled for the weekend, and I was feeling both anxious and uncertain. There were 15 of us to serve the guests, which included 8 men and 2 women, connected to a European crime group. We were expected to socialize with them, dance, and endure their advances. At some point, we would be taken aside for more private interactions. Afterward, we were expected to clean up and return to the party until it was over. At the end of the night, we would be paired with a guest to spend the rest of the evening in their company. On average, there were about 3 parties each month, in addition to visits from individual guests 2 to 3 times a week. I learned from the other women that James wasn't the only person involved in bringing people here. There were at least 2 other suppliers. Some of the girls I spoke to had been trapped in the same way as I was, tricked by promises of luxury and gifts while on vacation with their families. A few times a year, there were large gatherings where high-ranking figures from various criminal organizations attended. These events typically involved 5 or 6 leaders, along with their close associates and security teams, totaling about 50 guests in all. I had been at this place for nearly 5 years, and another one of these cartel events was approaching. For the past 2 gatherings, a particularly unpleasant cartel boss named Sanchez had requested me as his exclusive companion for the entire weekend. During our last encounter, I left with serious injuries and spent a week recovering. This time, I had been informed that Sanchez had asked for me again, and I was expected to fulfill all of his demands. On the first night, he shared my company with one of the other girls, and while it wasn't as bad as before, I remained anxious about what might come next. The next morning, Rhonda told me to pack my things because I was sold for $200,000 and had to leave the next day. I thought about jumping off the balcony, but I was too scared to do it. I told a friend about what was happening, and she started crying. When I asked why, she explained that he had bought other girls before, but he only kept them for a short time. I asked her what happened to them, and she said one of the guards told her that when he was done with them, he sold them to a place in Mexico. That night, he told me that I belonged to him now, and from then on, I would be very busy. I lay in his arms until he fell asleep. Then I moved as far away as I could and started to cry. I wished I could go back to my happy life with my loving husband and kids. While I was feeling sorry for myself, I suddenly heard loud noises outside. I sat up and listened closely. It sounded like trouble, with shouting and running. Sanchez jumped out of bed to find his gun. Just then, 2 people wearing masks rushed in. One injected something into Sanchez's arm and pushed him to the floor. The other one marked our door and then came to tie my hands, telling me to stay still. I was scared and confused. A man came in and asked who I was. I told him briefly and then he left. Later, a woman in a uniform came, untied me, and told me to get dressed. She led me downstairs where I saw other girls. There was a lot of mess on the floor and walls, but fortunately there were no serious injuries. I saw Rhonda with the others, and in a moment of anger I hit her. One of our rescuers pulled me back before I could do more. She's not one of us. She's one of the ones who kept us captive, I yelled. The woman asked if I was certain, and when everyone agreed, Rhonda was tied up and taken away. After talking to the authorities in England, I was flown to the U.S. for another interview at the FBI office. That's where I learned that my ex-husband had remarried, and his new wife was raising my children. I asked to see them and was waiting for a response. Now, back to my meeting with Special Agent Frank Grimes. Frank told me about Gwen's situation. It was sad, and I felt a little sorry for her, but in the end, it was her own decision that led her there. In my view, she got what was coming to her, but we both needed to find some closure. So I agreed to meet with her. All right, I'll meet her, but I don't think it will make a difference. As for her seeing the kids, we'll have to see about that. I was taken to an empty office where Gwen was waiting. She looked nervous, so I started the conversation. Hi, Gwen. How have you been? Hi, Gary. It's been a while. You look good, and I see you changed your hair. It really suits you. As for me, I've been better. Has Frank told you about the last 5 years of my life? Yeah, it sounds tough, but you brought it on yourself. What are you planning to do now? I'm not sure. I don't have any money, and I don't have anywhere to stay. They have me in a hotel for now. I might have to ask my parents if I can move back in with them. Your mom will likely be okay with it, but your dad might not be. He was really upset about what happened. I can't blame him. Looking back, I can't believe what I did. I'm really ashamed. I even thought about ending it all, but didn't have the courage to go through with it. I know you might never forgive me, and I won't ask that of you. But can we at least try to be friends for the kids' sake? Let's take it slow. We shouldn't rush things. Your parents and I have kept your photos around so the kids will remember you. It could still be a lot for them, and I plan to get some professional advice on how to reintroduce you into their lives. Things have changed while you were away. They now have a brother and a sister. Yes, I heard. Are you still living in the same place? No, we had to sell the old house because it was too small. We took out a mortgage for a bigger one. And just so you know, your dad is holding onto half of the equity from the house for you in case you need it. You've always been a good friend. I don't understand why I treated you so badly. I wish I could make things right with you and the kids. I know it was tough when you chose to move on, but if you had just been patient, things could have worked out. In the last 5 years, I've been promoted twice, and now I'm a deputy director. Anyway, I have other things to do. I'll talk to your parents tonight and bring them up to speed. I'll update Frank on how it goes, and you can take it from there. Is there anything else you want to say? Is that it? We were married for 6 years, and that's all you have to say? I made one mistake and paid the price, yet you treat me like this. I deserve more. You owe me. I hoped we could talk civilly about this, but think about it from my side. We went on a trip to try and save our marriage, and within 2 days you walked out on me, the kids, and our life together. You went off with a couple of people and said you'd be back in a few weeks. You ended our marriage right from the start when you were unfaithful. I found out because he sent me a message with details and a video. So, don't act like you're better than me when your life is a mess. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences. I owe you nothing. You've lied and cheated, and I'm glad to be done with you, Dot, with that. I walked away, leaving her very upset. I didn't get much work done that day, so I left early, which was unusual for me. I called Amber and told her I'd be home soon. She quickly sensed something was wrong and asked about it. I told her it was nothing to worry about, and I would explain once the kids were asleep. After dinner, when the children were in bed, we sat down and I told her everything. She sat quietly for a moment, thinking. You need to tell Ted and Amy and figure out what to do about her seeing the kids. I know, but I really don't want her around them. I'm worried she'll have a bad influence. She doesn't admit she did anything wrong and thinks she can just come back into our lives as if nothing happened. Why couldn't she have just stepped away? I know you're upset. You're just angry she came back. From what you said, she's had a really tough time in the last 5 years and needs help just like you did. Now go see Ted and Amy. Tell them everything and see how they feel. So I called Ted and said I was coming over to talk with them. I arrived at their place about 20 minutes later and saw 2 very worried faces. I tried to reassure them, saying we were all okay. We went into the kitchen and Amy made coffee. I asked them to sit down because I had news about Gwen. Their expressions changed and Ami started to squirm. I told them everything from the start, leaving nothing out. By the end of my story, Ami was in tears, and Ted was close to it. I had calmed myself down by then and thought about what Amanda had said about Gwen needing help. I know this news is shocking, but Gwen is still your daughter, and I believe you still love her deep down. Since she doesn't have a place to stay right now, I thought you might want to take her in until she gets back on her feet. She'll need support for a while, and I think this could be a good chance for her to see the kids again. Would you be willing to help? To my surprise, Ted spoke first. Gary, you're a good person, always thinking about others. We're not sure why Gwen did what she did to you, but you're right. We still love her and would be happy to have her back while she gets better. I thought this would be a great place for her to meet her kids and reconnect. But when would this happen? I don't want to be the middle person in this. I'll give you Frank's number and you can talk to him directly. If I can help make this easier, just let me know. After giving them Frank's number, I left. When I got home, Amanda was waiting for me. She asked how everything went. I explained our plans, and Amanda said I did the right thing and hugged me. The next day, I felt much more focused at work since we had taken a step towards healing our family. I called Frank and told him to expect a call from Ted. He thanked me and mentioned that Gwen was still upset after our meeting and needed rest. Later, Frank called to say he spoke with Gwen and that she felt much better after hearing some good news. I asked him when the meeting was, and he said it would be in 2 days. He planned to bring a counselor to keep things calm, but wouldn't leave Gwen there until her counselor thought she was ready. Amanda and I would prepare the kids for their meeting with their mom. The next day, we sat down with William and Sarah, who were 11 and 10 now. They could understand the idea of bringing families back together. We talked about how their mom had made a mistake 5 years ago and wasn't able to come home. But she loved them very much and missed them. She was back now, although not feeling well. Once she got better, she wanted to see them. They didn't seem too excited, but agreed to meet her because Amanda suggested it. Frank called to update me on how the meeting with Gwen's parents went. He said it started off a bit slow, but ended with tears and hugs. Gwen asked for their forgiveness, and they all felt better after. The counselor said it went better than expected and was a big step forward, but she wanted at least 2 more meetings before the kids were involved. After 3 more meetings, Gwen moved back into her old room at her parents' house. A month later, the counselor said it was time for Gwen to meet her kids. Amanda and I were nervous about this meeting since only I was invited, but the kids wanted Amanda there too. When Gwen's counselor heard this, she asked Gwen if that would be okay because the children looked up to Amanda as a mother figure. Gwen agreed, and we planned the meeting for the following Sunday, with a roast dinner being prepared by Amy Dott. On Sunday morning, we all got into Amanda's minivan and headed out. The kids were quieter than usual, and the ride felt very serious. We left Jason and Wendy with a neighbor who sometimes babysat for us. When we arrived, Sarah began to cry, saying she wanted to go home. It took Amanda a little while to comfort her. Ted stood by the open door and welcomed us inside. He mentioned that Gwen and Amy were waiting for us in the lounge. As we walked in, the kids ran straight to Amy for their usual hugs. I noticed that both Amy and Gwen had been crying. Amy spoke first. "Kids, this is your mom. She's been away for a long time and has missed you very much. Go and say hello." At first, the children hid behind Amanda, peeking out shyly. Amanda gently encouraged them. "We talked about this. There's nothing to be afraid of. Go on, say hello. She's here for you." Holding their hands, Amanda led them to Gwen. She released their hands and offered her own to Gwen, who shook it and smiled in thanks. Amanda then came back to my side, watching the kids closely, like a protective mother watching over her young ones. William was the first to approach Gwen, shaking her hand. "Hello. I recognized you when we came in. Your picture is on the wall at home, but you looked younger in that picture. I think I remember you from when I was little." I saw a tear roll down Gwen's cheek as Sarah spoke up in a surprisingly mature tone. "I don't remember you at all. I've seen your picture at home and here, and Dad says you love us. So why did you leave? You broke my daddy's heart. He was sick for a long time, and only Mom could help him feel better. Where were you?" Amanda, Amy, Ted, and I were taken aback by Sarah's words, and I worried Gwen would break down. But her counselor had prepared her for moments like this. Gwen wiped her eyes and replied, "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you and your dad. I made a big mistake and I couldn't fix it. I regret it every day and have missed you both so much. Now that I'm back, I hope you, William, and everyone else I hurt can forgive me. I'll do my best to make things right if you give me a chance." As the day went on, William began to warm up to Gwen, and even Sarah seemed a bit less upset, though she stayed close to Amanda. After dinner, Gwen sat on the sofa and invited the kids to join her. They looked to Amanda for approval before sitting down next to her. They chatted for most of the afternoon. Gwen wanted to learn about their school and interests. When they described their rooms, Gwen glanced at us and said she would like to see them someday. I wasn't quite ready for that yet, but Amanda thought it was a wonderful idea and agreed. By the time we left, Gwen and the kids were enjoying each other's company. After we picked up Jason and Wendy, we returned home and got the kids ready for bed. "Now that you've met Gwen, what do you think?" I asked. "I think she's a very troubled woman, but genuinely regrets her past actions, and it's clear she loves the children. She still cares for you, too." "I don't believe that," I replied. "Why did she break up with me if she cared so much?" "I don't think she even understands that, but I do believe she feels really sorry and wants to fix things." We talked a bit more and then went to sleep, feeling really tired. The next morning, Frank called and asked if I could pick up Gwen and take her to the office. I didn't want to, but I said yes anyway. When I got to her parents' house, Gwen was already waiting and got right into the car. I could see she had tried to look nice and even put on some makeup. We chatted about yesterday's visit on the way to the office and agreed it was a good step forward. When we got to the office, I was told to go to the war room, our nickname for the operations observation room. I took Gwen down to the sub-basement where it was. After knocking, we were let in. Frank and my director were waiting for us. The director asked Gwen to sign a security form and explained why. I called you both here because Amanda and Gwen's counselor agree you need closure after everything you've been through. First, let me tell you this. Your rescue was part of a joint operation with the UK to catch the leaders of drug cartels at their annual meeting. The operation was very successful and will disrupt drug shipments because their leaders have been captured. The ones left will be fighting among themselves for months. We are also working on stopping the human trafficking group and their helpers, like the two you unfortunately met, James and Mary. Many of them hadn't broken laws we could act on, so we had to take stronger measures. The President and other leaders in Europe have signed a declaration allowing us to take action without going through legal channels. I hope this gives you the closure you need. He then pointed to a screen in front of us, showing a big boat moving somewhere in the Caribbean. I recognized it as belonging to James and Mary. The director explained that a Navy SEAL had attached an explosive to it before it left the dock, and we were watching through a satellite. He held out a black box that looked like a cell phone. We quickly realized what it was. I took the device from him and handed it to Gwen. You went through so much because of them, so this is your honor if you want it. She took the box, thanked me, and pressed the button. The boat exploded into 1,000,000 pieces, flying high into the air. I looked at Gwen and could almost see her feeling lighter, just like me. Finally, we had closure. After thanking the director and Frank, we left the office. I was given the rest of the day off, so I took Gwen to lunch. It was the first time we had spent time together alone in 5 years. We ordered lunch and started a bit awkward conversation about our next steps. Gwen wanted us all to be friends, but I wasn't so sure, and said I would think about it. After lunch, I called Amanda and told her I'd be home early, so she should send her boyfriend away before I arrived. She found that funny but went along with it, saying my girlfriend had called off our weekend trip. Touché. Gwen listened to our jokes but didn't seem to find it funny, so I asked her what was wrong. She said she was surprised by our joking because trust is serious. I told her that it could be lighter with a strong bond like ours. She sat quietly, and when I looked at her, I saw she was gently crying. I took Gwen back to her parents' house before going home. The kids were happy to see me back early, and we played together for a couple of hours until it was time to pick up William and Sarah. They were glad I was home early and asked if we could go out to eat, so we went to Red Lobster for dinner. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Amanda asked about my day. I explained everything to her, including how it felt good for Gwen and me to finally talk. Amanda was happy and said this gave us some peace, so things would be better with Gwen from now on. A couple of weeks later, Amanda suggested we invite Gwen and her parents over for Sunday dinner since Jason and Wendy hadn't seen their grandparents since Gwen came to stay with us. Plus, it was time for Gwen to meet our children. I agreed, and we sent the invitation, which they accepted. The day went smoothly, and all 4 kids got along well with Gwen. William even called her Mom a couple of times. When he did, the room fell quiet, and Gwen looked at Amanda, who just smiled and gave her a thumbs up. Sarah was still a bit unsure about Gwen. When Amanda asked her why, Sarah surprised us all by saying, "If I start calling her Mom and loving her again, what if she leaves us again?" I looked at Sarah and saw tears rolling down her cheeks. I thought those were tears of worry. Amanda comforted her by saying that was a long time ago, and Gwen had changed a lot since then. She walked over to Gwen, gave her a hug, and said, "Welcome to the family." I don't think anyone in the room didn't have tears in their eyes. Gwen's parents weren't wealthy, but they were okay financially. Still, Gwen decided she wanted to work. Her skills were a bit old-fashioned, so she signed up for community college to train as a real estate agent, which would take 2 years. Since Amanda and I were doing well financially, we bought Gwen a used Toyota Corolla as a birthday gift from the kids. Once again, there were tears all around every week. Our extended family grew closer. Gwen came to our house often, and I would sometimes get home to find her having dinner with us. She even stayed the night a couple of times. All the bad feelings were gone, and we treated Gwen like family. She even looks after the kids for us when we go out. Life is nice. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.